Hello, I'm Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad, back with you for another round of fun. And thank you for joining me. Thank you to the Bloomsbury Institute and Bloomsbury Radio, as always. I'm slightly stalling because I'm trying to get into my topic, which may upset some of you. I know I say that all the time, but I think I actually mean it this time. So I want to talk about the current state of anti-Brexit campaigning, at least as I see it. I'm talking about how we are campaigning to rejoin the EU, how just anti-Brexit campaigning in general is going along. So I want to say to the anti-Brexit campaigners out there, you suck. I just want to be clear as well. What I mean by that is I don't mean the group of people who turn out whenever there's a rejoin march, usually people over 65. You probably vote Green. A lot of you are probably sort of old hippies, and you turn out. And actually, you know what? Fair play to you, because you can say you're the only foot soldiers left in the game, and I can't really fault you. So when I say you suck, I don't mean you people. Those people. Who I'm talking about in terms of sucking is I'm talking about the politicians and who are nominally pro-EU, and I'm also talking about people who campaign for this, particularly if they do it for a living. I think all of the current campaigning groups around this are pretty awful. I have sort of hinted at this in the past, and maybe I've said it slightly less stridently than I've just said it now, i.e. saying, you suck. But I think it kind of does need to be said, and I think I need to talk about some of this, why this is sort of systemic in a way. So I'll take you back to the Remain campaign very briefly in 2016, and I promise it will be very brief, so stay with me. I just think it needs to be said that the Remain campaign was really a shit show, and I don't think that's been explained enough. I think there's been this strange reluctance, I think, on the part of anti-Brexit campaigners to talk about how bad the Remain campaign was in any sort of detail. Now, I worked for one part of it, for a very brief period of time. I walked away not because I thought Remain was going to lose. I didn't think that up until June 23rd, 2016. But I did think that it was a mess and that I didn't want to be part of a mess. I had worked on the AV campaign 5 years earlier, and that was a real mess. And I thought, this just reminds me of exactly the same thing. There was a sort of smugness and an arrogance, a kind of inalienable sense of like they were on the right side of history, and that was what was going to see them through, and that only evil people, and there's a small minority of them in the world, were against them, and they were just going to win. And of course, we know that they didn't. And then when they didn't, we had to have all the Russians did it, and it was a fix-up, and it was a conspiracy, because actually people couldn't face the idea that lots of things, but one of which was Remain campaigned very badly and Leave campaigned very well. The Vote Leave campaign was an excellent campaign that was run by pros, whether you like them or not, but the genuine pros who knew what they were doing. And the Remain campaign was very amateurish and actually run by people who don't know how to reach out beyond their very cozy bubble and their mates and people who agree with them on everything. And they find it really alienating that someone could agree with them, say, on Brexit being a bad idea, but maybe disagreeing with them on any number of things like left-right axis of the economy, or Israel-Palestine, or, I don't know, trans issues, whatever. We could go over loads of them. The point being is that actually what pro-European campaigning has always demonstrated from the Remain campaign, and it continues to this day, is we only really want to be around people who agree with us on everything. And actually only good people should be against Brexit, and we only want good people around. And I think that is kind of where we are. And I think it really hurts. Well, I think it hurts the cause in many ways. Let's actually just for the moment state for the record where we are, where the country is. Poll after poll is taken of people's attitudes towards Brexit. And what it always comes back with is around 60% of people now think Brexit was a mistake. That has been the case for a couple of years now. We've sort of evened out at about 60%. It doesn't really go particularly that up or down. It's around 60%. I think for those of you who are math impaired, 60% is a very clear majority. In fact, if you got 60% in a referendum, you would describe it as an overwhelming, stonking landslide victory. In fact, the Leave campaign, very intelligently, I think, in terms of their own cause, declared 52-48 a landslide victory. So 60%, I think, is safely a landslide victory. Now you can say, well, that's polling, and if we had another referendum, any number of things would be the case. Sure. But it's interesting that for several years now, 60% is roundabout where we've ended up in terms of people who think Brexit's a bad idea. And so there is a group of people out there who are the majority, who do not feel that Brexit was a good idea. But I think several things hamper this. I think one of which is, again, the campaigners, coming back to You Suck, the title of this video. I think that one of the things we've got going here is being anti-Brexit, again, is sort of seen, I think, by a lot of people on the left as an item within the buffet of the Omni cause, right? And at any given time, it's probably not that important, and not as important at any given time as, say, trans rights or the Palestinians or whatever it is. That's fine. Again, if that's the way you feel about politics, I'm not suggesting you should change your politics. What I'm suggesting is that if you're serious about rejoining the EU, there should be some thought given to people who do not agree with you on all those things, yet don't like Brexit. And given that 60% of people are against, or who feel that Brexit was a bad idea, I'm going to venture that includes a lot of people who will not agree with you on all those will not have the designated left-wing opinion on those things, right? And just the campaigning groups and the way that they deal with Labour MPs and the Labour Party in general, and the way anti-Brexit campaigners often deal with the Labour Party is, I find it deeply annoying. And actually, I have some insight into this. Years ago, I worked for an organization that campaigned for proportional representation. Now, I'm not that big a fan of PR these days, as some of you long-term readers, listeners will know. However, at the time, I was a good little Lib Dem, and I campaigned for PR, like all good Lib Dems do. And I worked for an organization that allowed me to do that for a living for a period. And what was interesting is whenever I talked to Tory MPs about PR, this is what they would say. I don't like proportional representation. I don't think we should have it. I think we should keep first past the post. But we're here, we're having our coffee or a beer or a glass of wine or lunch or whatever it is. You try and tell me why you think PR is a good idea, and I will listen. And that was pretty much every Tory MP, and I spoke to a lot of them over that period of time. And yeah, that was. I can't think of. I'm genuinely struggling to think of a Tory MP who didn't take that basic approach with me. Labour MPs also took a very uniform approach when I spoke to them about PR, and it was this: listen, I love proportional representation. I mean, if it was just up to me, we'd have PR tomorrow. It's wonderful. It's obviously a fairer way of counting votes, etc., etc. On and on in that vein. But, there's nothing I can do because actually, just a lot of my colleagues disagree. And, we want to keep Labour Party unity. And now's just not the time for this. And, there are more important things. There are bread and butter issues out there that we really need to focus on. The economy, NHS. We can't just be going on about Brexit like all the time. Sorry, I slipped in Brexit there. You see what I did there? It was actually PR in this instance. But you get the gist. They now talk about Brexit in exactly the same way they talked about PR, 15 years ago. It's the same thing. It's this. They think that being against Brexit is the progressive opinion, right? But they for whatever reason, there's a sort of idea in the Labour Party that they went on about Brexit and they tried to stop it, and that's how everybody saw it, and they lost the red wall vote as a result, and so now they have to have a totally hardline pro-Brexit position, and there's a certain allowance given to people who can be not that hardline Brexit, but they certainly can't call for rejoin or a referendum or even rejoining the single market or the customs union. No. They can't do that. No, that would be... No. That's just completely wrong. So I think people need to see that the Labour Party are now, certainly that they're in government and they've served their purpose of removing the moribund Conservative Party from power. They should just, they don't need to be supported anymore. Trust me. The problem being, of course, who else do we have in this arena? Well, we've got the Liberal Democrats. And in fact, whenever I talk about the Lib Dems and Brexit, people always go, well, they're the pro-rejoin party, right? This is a commonly held thing. This is a thing that people who should know way better, who pay way too much attention to politics to be thinking this, think this, right? The Lib Dems policy on Europe at the moment is this. We should rejoin a customs union, or if failing that, we should form some sort of new customs union arrangement with the European Union. Now, look, if that's what you want, that's fine. I don't want that. You know why? That's Theresa May's hard Brexit. So no thanks. And if you want to give me this crap about, well, actually, it's an improvement on what we've got now, I don't think it really particularly is. Not that much, not really. I don't think it would take care of the real problems that Brexit has presented. Or failing that, someone will say, okay, well, maybe it's not that much better, but it's incrementalism. We need to creep back in. You know what? No, we don't. We really don't. That's not going to work. I'm really sorry about that. If you try and creep in, what's going to happen is it's going to fade away, and we're going to get further and further away, and the referendum's going to move further away, and all the arguments that were there are going to just move further away. And if you think, well, young people will save us, you know what? Young people can change their minds, and I wouldn't rely on that, personally. And you know what? When I look at changing the opinion, or the status quo on Europe, who's the guy who did it? Nigel Farage. He's the guy who changed it, right? In the opposite direction, okay, but the same rules apply. There's a status quo on Europe. People just felt like we weren't ever going to leave. That was never going to happen. We were in the EU now. That was fixed. For a long time, that's what people thought. I mean, people who were very Eurosceptic thought that for a very long time. Farage didn't. Farage thought, you know what? I can change this. If I work hard enough and I push hard enough on this, I can change the system. And you know what? He did. And you know how he did it? Was not through incrementalism. It wasn't through saying, well, you know what we need to do? We just need to leave the customs union and have a single market arrangement, which is... He never did any of that. No. What he did is he said we should have an in-out referendum on the European question, and it should be straight up, and if we vote to leave, we should just leave, and we should leave everything. That was his argument. And you know what? If you play that in reverse now, you might get somewhere. The incrementalism does not work. And I haven't even covered the Greens. Right, I'll go to the Greens. The Greens actually have a weaker policy on this than the Lib Dems, genuinely. Because often when I say this, I say, well, the Lib Dems just want to rejoin the customs union, blah, blah, blah. And people say, well, you should vote Green because the Greens have them. They're the real rejoin party. And you know what? They're not. Do you know what the Greens' current policy? It's even less substantial than the Lib Dems. Because at least the Lib Dems wanting to rejoin the customs union, right? That is something. That is an actual practical move of some description. The Greens just want a closer relationship with Europe, which is exactly what you say when you don't want to do anything. That is actually Labour policy. We'll have a closer relationship. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything at all. All this rubbish about they've got as well, they talk about setting the stage for when opinions might change. Guys, how is that going to happen? In what way are the opinions going to change? The Green Party aren't some NGO who's saying, well, if opinions change, we might change. They change because political parties like the Green Party say we should rejoin the EU, and then that gets injected into the conversation, and then people have to deal with it, and then that's what moves the Overton window on the issue, right? It's political parties saying we should rejoin, taking a very strong stance on this. And again, like, the Green Party doesn't exist to get us back into Europe, so fine. But please don't tell me that you should vote Green because they're a rejoin party. They're not a rejoin party, okay? We don't have any rejoin parties. What we do, we have very minor, tiny parties that run and get 73 votes in by-elections, and then everybody says, look, you see, everybody likes Brexit. It's counterproductive, is what I'm saying, to the cause. It really, really is. And it, again, it comes back to the campaigning groups. It's like, well, we could try and change opinion on this. We could try and get people on Question Time and really make a case for rejoin. We could try and create comfort zones for centre-right people to start talking about this again, which would shift the dial. But no, it's much easier to just have a march in London every year or whatever, get the old band back together, let people, fly the old EU flag or whatever, and 5,000 people or maybe less turn up, and then everybody, all the Brexiteers get to crow that no one cares about this, and it's all done, and it's all, an issue that no one cares about. You need a campaign organization out there that will aggressively campaign to rejoin. You need to have probably something close to a Farage figure on the rejoin side. And we don't really. And actually, I think if someone wanted to do it, I don't really see how they would. There's no support structure for that. And a lot of the current organization, the dysfunctional campaign groups around this, and I'm being kind calling them dysfunctional. They're really unfunctional, let's be honest. They stand in the way. They're not going to help someone. If someone came along and was a sort of Farage in reverse who wanted to march us back into the EU, they wouldn't support that person. Because that person would say, we've got to stop having these stupid marches and stop having to do this silly stuff. And actually, you know what we need to do? We need to do some serious political campaigning on this. They would hate that. And you know how I know that they would hate that? Look, in 2021, I started a Substack called This Week in Brexitland. And I kept at it for several years. And it was a call to arms. And I really thought, a sort of, if I build it, they will come. And I built it. And they didn't come. And in fact, I found myself constantly in situations where I was willing to, go quite far to try and campaign for rejoin, and quite willing to sacrifice better career opportunities because I was so committed to it. And I sort of ended up feeling quite foolish about that, and that was kind of a waste of my time and energy. And that's sort of where I am right now. And people ask me all the time, why don't you do this, or why don't you still write This Week in Brexitland? I just couldn't do it anymore. And it's because there are campaigning groups, and I sometimes I have lunch with people who say, hey, let's get together and talk about how we rejoin the EU, blah, 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 blah. And they just unload a bunch of the same old crap on me, and I say, thanks for that, thanks for the lunch, but that was, from a campaigning point of view, that was a waste of time. So some of you will be very upset that I have described these people as sucking, and I'm sorry about that, but I think it kind of needed to be said. And, if you want things to change, you're going to need to change them. Like, you're going to need to do it, and you're going to need to stop following people who give you half-baked or quarter-baked solutions that will not fly. That's my advice to you. How you choose to do that, I don't know. I think it should be a wake-up call to everyone what's happened this week. We've seen Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the country and Labour Party leader, talk about how we might end up an island of strangers, which other people have pointed out echoes Enoch Powell's 1968 Rivers of Blood speech. It's kind of where we are. And the Labour Party can say, well, we didn't know and it was unintentional. But actually, the fact that it's unintentional is almost worse, because it wasn't even homage. It was just, that's just what they actually think. And I wrote a piece in The Spectator that was wildly misunderstood about, why should people just not vote reform? What I was trying to say is no one's giving anyone else, everybody's just agreeing with Farage. And so if everybody's just agreeing with Farage, why shouldn't people make Farage the Prime Minister? You don't want Farage to be Prime Minister. Okay, you need to offer something that is counter to Nigel Farage. You can't just go, oh, well, we agree with Nigel Farage on everything, but actually we'll do a better job of whatever he's incompetent and he won't know how to govern. You shouldn't make him prime minister because we're better at it. And how's that being demonstrated in any way? I don't understand. Anyway, rant over. Thank you very much for listening. I'm Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad. I always say this, but I say this more than usual this week, that the views expressed do not in any way correspond with anyone's other than my own, particularly the Bloomsbury Institute or Bloomsbury Radio. Thank you for joining. Thank you to Barra, my producer, as always, for producing. And I will see you next time. Thank you very much.
I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. What a glory.